to go. All right. Thank you, some of you and all of you, for being here and for sharing what brought you here. Let me just do one more audience interaction. You all can just call this out. What identities do we have in this space today? For example, I am a Palestinian. I'm a writer. I like to dance. A dancer, I guess, is the identity. Thank you. Yeah, Iraqi, Lebanese, Egyptian, Palestinian, Ethiopian. Nice. You're all welcome here. Cool. Thank you for participating in that. You know, we put our panelists in the spotlight, so I figured I'd turn it all on you for a little bit. Okay, so welcome, ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome to the Arab American National Museum. My name is Lujain, and I am the communication specialist here. So if you've seen any kind of written material, I probably touched that at some point. Thank you. And before we begin today's program, I'm going to ground us with a few acknowledgements, and then we'll go over some housekeeping, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists. So, of course, a lot of you are aware that we are currently gathering during an active genocide that is taking place in Gaza. It's not very often that we are aware of a genocide as it's happening. Usually it's labeled after the fact. That's something that we want to keep in mind as we have this conversation about labels and linguistic self-determination. So the ongoing genocide that is in Gaza is also concurrent with the current violence in Palestine, and it's a continuation of decades of colonial violence under Israeli apartheid. I'd also like to acknowledge that we stand in solidarity with the victims of genocide in Sudan and Congo. We stand firmly against anti-blackness and recognize the police violence and all white supremacist violence must be named and opposed. I'd like to acknowledge that the Arab American National Museum sits on Anishinaabe land and resides within the region with the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the nation. And our neighboring city, Detroit, is also in Anishinaabe territory and other indigenous peoples' land, namely the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi tribes. And it's also the largest majority black city in the nation with a long legacy of African diasporic contributions. So together we also uplift and honor the indigenous and diasporic communities from wherever you may be joining us if you're watching via the live stream. A huge thank you to our museum members and supporters. If you'd like to make a donation to the museum, you can do so on our website. Donations are also strongly encouraged to the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, which you will find QR codes around. I'll also put in a huge word for mutual aid because that is the most effective way to donate money at this time for families in Gaza who are actively evacuating through Egypt. Yeah, so now we can begin our conversation, and we'll begin with some brief self-introductions from our panelists. Noor, why don't we start with you? Because you're to my right.
Hello. My name is Noor. I'm a poet, community member in Dearborn. We'll use dancing also as an identity marker. Former Ohioan, current Michigander, and artist.
I'm Doris Bittar. I'm an artist and an activist and a writer, and currently having an exhibit upstairs. I'm very grateful for this museum, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity it has provided for this very forum, this conversation with Elder Lucy, who will introduce herself momentarily, and opportunities for a conversation about our crossings and our crossroads.
Bonjour, Anine. My name is Lucy Harrison, and I'm an elder in this region and also in Canada. I come from the Bekej-Wakan of the Anishinaabe, the First Nations, as we call ourselves, on the Canadian side. On this side, I just go by, Native American, but I'm an Anishinaabe, Kwe, which means, woman, female. And there's a lot more, definitions through, the language, that I don't even have time, I don't think, today, given, the agenda, but I will focus a little bit on that. And I'm very honored to be asked. This is, my second time, that I have been asked, to come here and to share with you a little bit about what I find is important as, the Anishinaabe and Okwé that I am. What I've come to learn about, myself and about my, land and territory here, and the people, the three, fires. We come from the three fires, as was said, the Adawa, and the Potawatomi, and the Anishinaabe people. My people have lived here for over 10,000 years, so we're still here. It's still, my land. It's still our land. Whether I walk in Detroit or Dearborn, or I'm in the UP. It's a large, territory, that covers. But we are sitting here on, Anishinaabe territory, and I'll let it go back to the other, speaker, to start the agenda. So, miigwech, that means, thank you in our language, for your ears and your eyes. Miigwech.
Yeah, Ahimsa, Timoteo Budran could not make it today, but he sent us a message I'd like to share with you. It's not really an introduction, but I think just words to go by. Also, was I holding the mic close enough to Lucy? Was okay? Okay. All right, so this is from Ahimsa, and he said, blessings to all gathering today and every day when we gather together to affirm our intersectional movements, communities, and histories of creativity are woven together. We resist the forces of ongoing colonial oppression that seek to isolate, divide, and pit us against each other. My hope for today's dialogue is that it furthers our ever-deepening commitment to support each other's sovereign futures. As creative, critical, and collaborative kin, we need to increasingly center the embodied knowledge and leadership of women of color, queer, transgender, and two-spirit Indigenous people and people of color and multiracial people living at the intersection of our communities. Because the forces of oppression have always been intersectional, our movements for liberation must be as well. Thank you all. Gather together. May your sovereignties and creatives flourish. I just want to say about Ahimsa that he is a New Yorker from the part Indigenous from the tribes in the New York State going up to Canada. And he is also Moroccan, Jewish descent. And so he's really, we miss him because he really bridges, and also his gender knowledge and being is something that we're gonna, I don't think we're gonna miss it too much, but his voice is in our heads as we speak, and I just want to honor his support of us, even though he's not here today.
Thanks, Doris. Yeah, so one thing I forgot to mention, some housekeeping, is we have our public programming team around. If you see them, they'll be on the sides throughout the event, and they have note cards and pens. So we encourage you all to jot down your questions that way. When we do a Q&A with the audience, we'll be using that method. So all the note cards will come to me, and I will read them to our panelists to help facilitate and streamline the discussion portion. All right, so Doris, a big part of why we have this panel is you are like our great convener, I've been calling it. Doris is our great convener today. And you have a history of working with Arab and Indigenous communities in a variety of locations. So what similarities have you seen amongst both the communities, and can you also tell us a little bit about why you chose the eagle to represent this panel?
My interest in the Native American populations goes really way back to like junior high school. I don't quite know why, but that was how it began. Also, the organization I've been involved with, the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, has a very interesting history of having begun by James Aberizik, who was the senator of South Dakota, who wrote the Indian Children Welfare Act. He was born and raised on in a tribe in South Dakota, I think a Lakota tribe, and his father owned the general store, and so as he was growing up, he noticed, he's of Lebanese ancestry, he died a couple of years ago, but he noticed how bad things were for especially Native American children, and wrote that act in 1978. In 79, there was the Abscam event where the FBI agents posed as Arab sheiks and tried to go after more liberal senators and embroil them in a scandal that then disabled their support of Arab American communities. And so that's the founding of the ADC, the oldest, largest civil rights organization. I worked for them for 3 years, but I've been a volunteer for about 35 years. Anyway, so when it's always kind of on my mind, and when my exhibit upstairs, Colonial Colonnade, began, I wanted to reach out long before October 7th. We had this planned in the last spring, like a year ago, that we wanted to bring in Native communities, and I met Elder Lucy Harrison 6 months ago, and we talked a lot about what's in common just visually. So the eagle is important to cultures in Arab society, as well as Palestinian, as well as indigenous. And if you notice the eagle, and it's pretty ubiquitous throughout North America, also looks like the United Farm Workers symbol. I think they derived it from that, but I'm just making that up. That's just that's like my fantasy. But anyway, so also sage, so the Arabic on this side is the word eagle in Arabic, trying to pose it around a nascent eagle in Arabic behind it. And then on the other side, on your right side, are sage plants, also the word in Arabic for sage, but created to form a plant. Also very important in Palestinian culture. I mean, especially when they're under siege. Sage is something that is gathered and is healing and is used in cooking, as well as making tea and other things. And then native peoples, I think, also make a tea and smoke it, as essence. So I don't know what else. Is that good? Okay.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm wondering if Elder Lucy or Newt, if you wanted to jump in on similarities you've seen, whether it be policy, imagery, symbolism, behavior, ritual.
Yes, going back to the sage, and the reason that she's holding, the mic, I had, surgery, so I can't use my, left arm very much. So, thank you, Doris. I know that gets heavy after.
As long as it doesn't bump into you.
It's fine. But with regard to the sage and our, dialogue, and, we spent quite a bit of time in a dialogue and about the various, types of, the eagles. There's, the brown or, the gnu, the blue eagle, the American eagle, and this, eagle here comes from the thunderbird. I just wanted, to clarify. And the thunderbird and the image of the thunderbird goes back, like I said, thousands of years, really, in the stories and the teachings that our people carry. And there's a lot of teachings just with, the thunderbird. And if you go like to gatherings or, to powwows, you'll often see some of the, the beadwork actually with, the thunderbird, i.e., or sometimes, the eagle, clan. And our people are, related to different, animals or what we call, dodoms. I come from the crane clan. That's, my family's, clan. But this is, distinctive of what we called, the thunderbird. And the sage was a very, profound, conversation of ours. I just wanted, to spend a little bit of time just clarifying why we chose to talk about and use, the sage, and Doris, used it in her and the creativity of the art that she, designed. And the sage, for me, represents our people, and that we use, the sage, for healing, for, for cleansing our bodies. Often in our ceremonies or gatherings, we start with, use of that smudge. I'm sure, some of you have heard of smudge, perhaps have even, been in, ceremony or, gatherings where we use the sage. And what I did today is I made, sage tea using the local sage that grows here. It's not, California sage. This comes from our territory here. Often a lot of people think that, sage, just grows out in California, but we have our own sage that looks very different too than, California sage. And where I come from, it's very, proper that we give, the person who's in charge of the gathering or, whatever, the workshop in this case. And so what I have here is sage that I'm going to give, I'm going to give to, Doris. This is the sage that comes and it grows at, our farm. And, oh, yes, if you would like to open, the medicine. So sage is carried with a lot of reverence. We keep it in a very, safe, part of our home, in fact. And after, we cure it. And I have a helper here, over here, Erin is the, Skibawis. And she's just going to come and open. I just want you to see that the sage is also, I made it, it's fresh, and I had to seep it. And I prayed over the sage because that's what we do whenever we're working with, the medicines. We have to pray and seek. We have, to petition, Creator to help us with, whatever it is we want of the sage, in this case, that medicine used on this day. And so, before I came here early on, maybe a few hours back, I said, my prayers for this gathering here, and that we would come together, collectively as one. And certainly the reason you're here is, to come and learn. We're here because we are trying to do better. As I think, people of color, different, nations are very, honored that we really have a mix here. That says a lot about the community here. But I asked Creator to help us with our thoughts, with our emotions, to help us with, the struggles that we're all feeling about, this war. It has, infiltrated all of our homes. Certainly in mine, a lot of, debates, a lot of talks, and a lot of pain is coming through. We know this. So I wanted to take the sage from here, from the artwork, and actually make it real. And I think, by taking, the recycled water and the prayers and the actual sage and cooking it, how we say in Indian way that, we're cooking it up good, I mean, for a long time, because, the longer that, we cook something like the sage, the medicines, the more, healing and stronger it is. As you probably know, some of the medicines they refer to as bitters and that type of thing. The stronger, the more, the potent that it is. And when we get done, if you would like to even, drink of the sage, I really encourage you, unless you're allergic to sage or, whatever, because it is our medicine. I will, have our helper, pour some in the cup here. And we can even pour some in the copper container. Why do I have copper? I'm sure some of you have the answer why, copper is important. Do I see any hands? Oh, I'm surprised. Copper is a medicine, and we have copper throughout our bodies, and we have copper that that we have to we need the copper in our body. We don't ever want to have a deficiency in copper because it causes a lot of problems for us. And so often when we go to ceremony, when I go to ceremony, we keep our water, our teas in copper containers because the the copper is very potent in, you know, the medicine also. So if you were to keep your water or your in this case sage tea stored in a copper, you know, receptacle or a copper pail, if you were to keep that over 24 hours, you know, 48 hours, it even becomes even more healing. You know, the medicine, you know, properties become, you know, that much more, you know, stronger and powerful. So my job as a Native, you know, woman in our nation is I'm responsible for the water, and I'm keeper of the copper. So I must, when we have ceremony, it's my job to bring the copper out, to bring that water, and to take care of the water, right? Because water is, I used a word, so, you know, holy. We must keep the water clean, and there's things that we have to do. As you see here, this is closed because we keep things, you know, concealed so that things are, so that they're kept, you know, so that, you know, they're kept, you know, clean, and we can assure that it's pure when it reaches, in this case, when you have a drink. So that's a little bit about, you know, the sage. It is very important that I describe it in that way, you know, because it is, you know, medicine. It's a form of medicine, and we use, you know, copper not only, you know, to smudge with, but, you know, we use it in different, you know, ceremonies, as we use it in this case, you know, to drink. And often, if we get sick from, you know, various, you know, illness, it is the sage tea that we often, you know, use, as opposed to, say, you know, cedar or, you know, different other, you know, medicines. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I never knew that about copper, and I think that's unlocked more potential for all the ways that I cook and make food.
The other thing I think from the Middle East is that you use copper for, yes, different, you know, pots and things. And I was hoping to do, you know, some research to sort of gather that, and I haven't had time to do that. So that's where, again, that's where, you know, the similarities are, that we're really not aware of all the similarities that we have with, you know, herbs and medicines, and in this case, you know, copper.
Yeah, my mom had copper pots, or enamel, but copper inside, because they conduct really well and evenly. I mean, just, yeah.
Yeah, if you've ever fried an egg in a copper pan, it's great.
What this is making me think about as we reflect on sage, I love this meditation on sage that we're doing right now, is during Nekbe, when my grandmother and great-grandmother were fleeing, they used maramiye, which is sage, to ward off the hunger that they were facing. And I'm thinking about the ways that I love rooting us in sage right now, because I'm thinking about the land and all of the ways that we use the land to heal ourselves so that we can continue surviving and continue resisting. And there is such a, I think, living in this country, a discrepancy between moving about in our days without a connection to the land, and a way of interacting with people and the systems around us without a level of groundedness that occurs, and especially in times of such difficulty when we're facing this genocide and observing it and attempting to witness it. And so thank you for rooting us in that and placing an importance on it.
Yeah, something about having these shared practices and rituals makes me feel hopeful, because there's a rightness and a truth to them simply by knowing that a tribe for 10,000 years has been doing one thing on this land, and oceans away, a tribe has been doing it there for centuries. And there must be truth to something that's been done for centuries, no? I feel like that's true.
No, completely. And I mean, when I was growing up, it's like if you were sick, if your stomach was hurting, if you couldn't sleep, if you had the flu, if you were sad, what did you drink?
Meramia.
Maramia.
So yes, Elder Lucy, I'll bring the floor to you again. So throughout your years, I've read that you were working with a variety of people to improve the health, specifically health aspects and impact on the First Nations in the regions that you are an elder in. And I'm sure that requires building a lot of relationships, meeting with a lot of people of different communities. So what's some advice you have for us as we want to bridge between communities, and what are some successes that you've had with communities you've worked with?
Well, one of the first success that I had at American Indian Health and Family Service, Minnow, Bemadzewin, which is our first name, that means a good life, and within that good life, there is a flow with the way life flows, and in our songs, in our way that we always think about Minnow Bemadzewin when we start our day, and we enter into prayer. We speak about, Minnow, Bemadzewin, and having that we have a better understanding of the day when we think about the good life that, Creator has given us in lots of ways, that we have a shelter, and we have our land that we stand on each day. I think sometimes we may take that for granted. We don't really think upon that too often, right? It just, because life gets busy. I start my day with prayer, because it keeps me grounded no matter the challenges that always come to be, right? We all start with that agenda, but then something comes. I always say, life happens and it changes up our agenda, right? Adds things, and we have to shift things around, and some things we thought might be important go to the bottom of the list. But getting back to what are some of the relationships that I had, to make, to bridge our services and, to grow them, back some 25 years ago, the amount of funding that we received to deliver health and human services, the drug and alcohol, the whole A through Z line of services, we were given $264,000 from the government. Not a whole lot of money. Some would say a drop in the bucket, right? And that's what it was. And we existed out of a very poorly built structure that I had to paint and scrub, and it really wasn't fit to deliver health and human services out of, but it gave us the four walls, and some nurses and doctors, and the board came together and said, but we can do this, and we did. And the very first week that I hung up the sign, the doors are open, I think we saw 116 Native American people. So that in itself gave me, the hope. I knew that our people were here. I knew they needed, health care. And the people that I bonded with and went to seek, companionship and help just, discussing, the issues was actually, access. And it was, Ishmael. And I had met him at a meeting, and I was very impressed with what he was already, doing. So I called, I got the phone number, I called him, and, we met, for coffee, going back. And I had to learn, and I had to learn what it would take to learn, the healthcare system, from a citywide, level, from a countywide, from a statewide, from a federal, like tying it all in. There's a lot of, the politics that you have to, surrender to. But I knew that I was going to do things, Indian way, with a good heart, that I wasn't going to get into the politics in a negative way, that's not the way that we're going to start our work, because we're in, health, and our services should come from the heart. It should be good. And what guided me was, Minnow Bemadzewin. And I remember that very first day when I sat, with Ishmael, I was a little bit intimidated. I was young, I was green, I did not know, the way of the world in terms of health and human services, because it was a dog-eat-dog kind of a thing. And if you went in front of, if you had to go in front of, city council, you were not treated very well. So I understood, racism in a different way. I didn't understand that when I was small and growing up. I understood, the love of, my people. And I didn't know that I was poor, that we didn't have a whole lot. All I knew is that we had love and we had this laughter, and we could swim together and hunt together and be as one around the fire. And I didn't know any different, right? That I just had 2 shirts and 1 dress, or 2 pairs of socks. You don't think of yourself as living in poverty. That's not poverty to me anyway. What I knew was this family was so loving and kind that they would share their last fish. We would share it with everybody who showed up at the house. Didn't matter who you were, or if you were Chinese or black, it just didn't matter. Everybody was treated as family. And if you came to my center, everybody was treated as family. And so Ishmael came. He wanted to see the building that we were housed out of, and he was shocked. He was shocked. And he felt bad, and he was saddened by, the politics. But I wasn't. I felt very, proud, and he didn't understand that about me. And we had a very human talk about that. And I said, I know that we don't have a lot right now, but it's not always going to be like this. But the rooms here give us the space that we need to see our patients. I have very good doctors. That was very important. And I had, some of the best on this team. They came to work for me, not because I could pay them a lot of dollars. They came to help me raise, the level of health care for Indian people. And this is what happened, with Ishmael and I. We decided to do things under, the radar, meaning, he would send me checks every now and then, and it would just go to wherever. Even when he left that day, he left the check at the front desk. And he didn't say how much he was going to leave, because he felt so, disheartened about the conditions. And, we spoke about that at our meeting. He said, I thought things, were bad for the people that I service, my people, but, we are rich compared to the First Nations of this land. And so he said, I'm going to help you, and I'm going to introduce you to different forums and meetings at the state level that I want you to attend. It's very important. He also said, you may not get anything, from those meetings. You may not see your first, dollar for 1 year, maybe, 5 years. And even more so, the saddest part was we sustained a fire, by arson. And that's when, the AFT had to come in and, figure out who was trying to harm us. So talk about the trauma that I experienced, and the trauma of, my people, and then here, we're hit with a fire. And when they came in the healthcare center after it had been burning up, and I was so shocked anyway by the fire, and our building, but when I saw those gunshots in the walls and everywhere else, my family wanted me, to leave, healthcare and just get out of the ball game, because they felt it was very, dangerous for me. What happened was I had a vision, and I actually ended up, sick. I had got a lung infection from, going in the building with the FBI and everybody who was investigating the fire. I got sick. I ended up in a hospital, and it was while I was in a hospital, I had a vision, and that vision came to, I was told through that vision, I was shown what I needed to do to carry on. And I knew when I left the hospital, I had to tell my family that I was going to stay, that I needed to fight the good fight. And that's what I did. And Creator, rewarded me in a lot of ways, because I knew what, was missing. And what, was missing was our culture. Our language needed to be brought into healthcare to really, to help us, to give us those tools that we need, because we're not going to survive here, even as, people of color, the people of color that we are, collectively, unless we hold onto our culture. If we walk with pride and we carry our culture, with us, that's where we get our strength, because that's who we are. And you take away the culture, we don't have anything. So I think there was a question in the back, or over here, how do you do this work, collectively? How do you bridge? Well, that's what we're doing right here as an example. And it just, it's what we've always been doing. At least it's always what I've been doing for the past, 40 years of my life, working here in, Detroit, not, to mention, what I do in Canada. But it's being able to sit down with the, diversity, that is present in our world here. And we have to break, bread, together. I think we said that when we had, dinner in, November. We have to be able to be comfortable with each other and have those difficult conversations, like I had those many years back. Long time ago, with Ishmael, we had some very uncomfortable conversations. And here we are today, having those same conversations, except I think things are a little bit more challenging, and they are because of this war. They are also more challenging because there's a lot of, infighting going on, disagreements. I'm Native, you're Jewish, you're this, you're that. We keep, referring to that rather than just, sitting down. I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother first. I'm a great, grandmother, and I'm an auntie, I'm a cousin, I'm all of those things, eh? And I know it doesn't matter if I'm here or I'm at a county meeting or I go to the water board to talk about, PFAS or to find out what we're not doing right, that I see all of you as a man and a woman. And I see maybe, children over here, and we're all, related. We all, represent, the web of life. So I'm not sure if I answered.
Yeah, thank you. You answered and provided me with more questions to ask. One of the things I was thinking about while you were talking is just, it's something I think I inherently knew, but it just clicked for me all of a sudden, yes, something like healthcare, human services, these are all, in a way, a universal thing that we can provide for each other, but it does have nuance when our cultures come into play, because there's a different way that healthcare might be administered from one community to another, because culture is important there, and actually respecting and uplifting, and then by respecting that culture and actually doing it the way that that person would have been most comfortable with, the health becomes administered more seamlessly. I hadn't really thought about that before, but that's why these ethnically or culturally specific human services agencies exist. And so then my question becomes, if we are interchanging these skills and we are relying on each other to provide it for each other, how do we make sure that the people who are these wells of knowledge can adhere to the different cultures that they serve, or make sure that each culture can, make sure each culture has what they need to thrive and do things accurately and appropriately, but together? I don't know if that question made sense. You all tell me.
Yeah, I think it's very clear with Lucy's description of her life, and there's more to it than that, too. She was part of the forced adoptions and orphanages, and she has that history as a child, which is what, that legislation was passed to protect, by an Arab American, to protect people in her relationship with Ismail. I mean, you could see it's, we have history between us already, not just because of October, but October, and now the Arab Americans have the MENA designation, which is primarily for health reasons and discrimination, and being able to collect that data so that we could get better health care, get better, protection, and all of that. So when October began as it did, I struggled a little bit with what it is we can do for each other, what it is, Lucy can enlighten us about in terms of how to deal with a genocide. Of course, Native populations in this country have been through major and mini genocides in some ways that continue today. I mean, they're displaced people, moved from their rivers and towns that they knew to barren land, which then became oil land and moved again, and kind of abused that way, and people in prison, long prison sentences for just standing up for their rights, and so we have a similar thing with the foundation, the Foundation 5, the Holy Land Foundation 5. Also, 3 of them are still in prison, 1 has been deported, and they might be there for the rest of their lives for doing nothing, for helping people, for helping your people and standing up for your people. So my expectation was acknowledgement. I didn't know, after October, I mean, of course, genocide has always been built in for over 100 years in the rhetoric coming out of the Zionists. And but this time it was so just documented and plainly seen, and I just remember all of us really feeling quite stunned that we were watching it in real time, but also looking to the First Nations, the Indigenous people for guidance. You survived it. Justice hasn't been made yet, in a way, but you survived it. And so gave me hope for survival. But the other thing I started thinking about is, what is it we need to do? What is it we need to talk about as an Arab community with other communities? What is it we need to workshop? What are the words we need to use now? Because something changed in all of us. Something really changed and shifted. I mean, just a quick example. Before October, I was like, call it whatever you want. And Edward Said said this, call it Israel, but just give everybody rights. Well, after this event and during this event, I'm like, no, they lost their naming rights. How do I talk about that? Where did that come from? Because I sincerely believed it doesn't matter what Palestine is called as long as everyone's got rights. And now I'm like, no, they can't get that reward of there will be Israelis if they choose to remain in Palestine. I mean, and it's like, that sounds so aggressive. And I'm a pacifist, but I'm a kind of an aggressive pacifist as opposed to a passive-aggressive. There's a difference there. Anyway, so those are some of the sort of contentious issues that are on my mind. And in terms of art making, the installation above has 1 steel sculpture in it, but everything else is soft installation, soft sculpture. And since then, I live in San Diego, I go between San Diego and Los Angeles, I've been just making steel sculptures, things that look dangerous and scary and threatening. That might just be a play on a couple of words. And so that's the aggressive pacifist part of me. But I just want to touch upon what has changed and where do we go from here and how do we share. And I even started thinking about, why can't Native peoples go back to their land? Why can't, through some sort of housing direction, houses that are available are then given to them, back to them on the banks of the rivers and the hills and the plains that they lived in, wherever those are. And so somehow we all think of Turtle Island now, and somehow that all seems more possible, even though the Native peoples were decimated, really decimated. And then the strength from culture and nurture, and that also Palestinians and then Arab peoples have themselves. So those are the things that I just want to bring out those questions.
You were saying that it's more possible to envision a future where we return land here.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I also Palestine, you know,
Yeah.
I
think because I know that I can speak for myself, you know, and working with other Palestinians when we talk about our futures and we do envision this liberated Palestine, we can't divorce that idea of liberation from reclamation of land. And I think if we can imagine it for our country, then we must extend that imagination for the First Nations here in North and South America. And also South America, you know, we have the Mayans in Guatemala at the end of most of last summer through the end of the 2023, were also fighting for their own sovereignty within Guatemala. Yeah. Noor, did you want to add anything to what we were talking about, just like ways that solidarities have come into play?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about, you were talking about what changed since October, and that aggression is very real. And I think what I'm trying to do is I've re-envisioned and attempted to figure out what the hell I'm doing in my own artwork and what I'm trying to do with it. And part of that is this focus on creating that future. Because if we can create it on a page, if we can create it in an art gallery, then we're a little bit closer to creating it in the world, right? And the second thing is, I think the role of the artist right now is, I don't care about good art. I think that art is the means we use to get to community. And when we get to that community, we get to cultivate that trust through events like this and through being together, so that when we do need to resist as one collectively, we already have a shared language and a shared focus and a trust in each other. So there isn't that like infighting that we're talking about, or this sense of dysregulation that occurs when we are isolated and facing things alone, these really scary, horrible monster machineries that are threatening us. And we share sage tea with each other, right? We've done this, and we figure out ways to survive. So that's what it's done for my work personally, and what's changed. And especially well, I'll stop there for now.
Well, I like what you said about art and not really being interested in good art right now, because what is art other than an expression of creation and recreation? And if it kind of reveals a lot about ourselves in ways that we might not know how to use words to do. I mean, you know, unless you're a poet or a writer, but I feel like even they are just using 10 words to describe one thing. It's like, okay, we are actually, as far advanced as we are as a species in language, we are also so far behind in being able to use these vast vocabularies to express how we truly feel and what we really want, and like our desires are still clouded over and over again. But I think what we seem to be working towards when we create art is revealing those desires and also trying to communicate with each other. And then if we can kind of figure out how to get on the same page about it, we have that trust that you were talking about, that we can build community from.
No, completely. And I'm thinking about what art has done for me, and I'm thinking, so Doris's exhibit, it highlights these words. There's this emphasis on all of these words that you're thinking about, and you're making these lists, and part of it is compulsive. Part of it is this like nervous system reaction and trying to pin something down, or like a feeling. And I'm thinking about lately the word, or the concept of being awake, of moving through this world with my eyes open, when what I want to do is I want to close my eyes and I want to like sit under my desk and not leave on days. And I think the role of the artist is that you are choosing to move through the world with awareness and with an openness to feeling the grief alongside the joy, alongside the laughter, alongside the desperation, and you're choosing to document this. And I think that is not something that should be taken for granted, because what we find in our American collective consciousness is a state of sleepiness, of just, I go to my 9 to 5.
Of convenience, I
Of
often say.
convenience, yeah. Of like, I go to my 9 to 5, I come home, I eat dinner, I see my kids, I watch Netflix, and then I go to sleep. And I do not engage with the rest of the world. I do not engage in community. I do not face these difficult realities and what they're doing to me. And one can move through the world without an awareness of the machinery that is dead set on killing you. Or you can try to grapple with it and find language for it and create meaning out of it and move us toward collective liberation.
Yeah, a well-designed machine is not intended to be noticed. You know, it just works in the background. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, on the role of art, I want to ask all of you, how your art, I mean, Doris, you talked about how your art has changed, but do any of you have any other ways that art has changed in the past few months? Or how you've approached art lately?
Well, you know, bearing witness to all of this and how people communicate and focusing on words and whose words are they that define us? Are they our words?
Mm-hmm.
Are they words that expose the narcissism of someone else, not us, to describe us? I'll just tell you a quick little story. Last Tuesday in San Diego, we met with the San Diego Unified Board of Directors, who were writing something for Arab American Heritage Month for us, and they just destroyed it. They got rid of the Palestine. They got rid of everything. It was Middle East and not Arab. It's Arab American Heritage, and we met to rectify it because we already had a big scene at their meeting 2 weeks ago, and we really just slammed them, you know. So they came back. And the head of the board, the president, is a Jewish woman who had done all this violence that was caught in real time, because we all had shared documents. And the first thing she did was, at this meeting, was apologize. And I was going to ask for her an apology later, but I didn't have to because she apologized. And she cried, and she said, "I'm sorry I hurt you." And she cried a lot, which I thought, okay, I mean, come on, now I'm worried about you crying. Like, there was that narcissism, you know, like, how do you... And then we went through the document and all the words, and one word, they were listing all the things that have contributed to anti-Arab, you know, racism and all of that. And one of the words they had was that the vice president of the board insisted on hanging on to, and I was like, no way is that going to be in this document. And it was the word misunderstanding. I told my husband that, my husband's Jewish, and he was like, he just laughed out loud. I mean, misunderstanding means we contributed to your misunderstanding. I'm sorry, that's not what happened. I said, we can keep the word misunderstanding in there if it says misunderstanding by design. Otherwise, it has to all be removed, because Arab American Heritage is about us, not you. He goes, my children know there's misunderstanding. I was like, no, we've been very clear. If you choose not to listen or hear us or respect us, that's on you. That's your problem. Doesn't end up, you know, I mean, so those are some of the things I'm like hanging on to every single word. Is this our word? Is this someone else's word? Does it represent narcissism for someone else's issues, someone else's pathology, you know?
And there's a lot of that rhetoric in movement spaces, right? It's like, what words do we use? How do we talk about ourselves? How do we talk about each other? We use them to identify ourselves, to identify the harm. Like when I opened, I was talking about genocide, and you know, just how long it took for people to use the word genocide. And it felt like a sick victory when we finally got them to say it. And now ceasefire is being like conflated with something that means liberation, and it's like all it means is stop killing.
It's such a low bar.
Yeah. And so we have these like words to categorize phenomenons, and we also reclaimed some words and we rejected others. I know there's a conversation now. People are, and we won't get into it, but just as an example, like people are like, "What? I'm no longer Arab. I am Palestinian. I am Lebanese. I am Yemeni." Really holding on to the ethnic identity as an identifier because it means something more significant than Arab or what Arab has been washed to mean now. So what are some of the words that you've all seen in practices of self-determination and self-preservation, and how have they like become patterns that we repeat?
In terms of, I'm thinking less about identity markers and more about the specificity of language and how important it is right now to insist on that specificity and to ask people what they mean when they say things, especially as we interrogate headlines that are passive in their language. These are intentional, and they infiltrate in very tricky ways in that you start to think passively when you see it enough, and you have to resist it, and it changes how you start to structure a certain problem, especially when it's chalked up to a misunderstanding. Like, what is that? What do you mean by a misunderstanding? Are we? Did I mishear you? Did I? And I've gotten into the habit of when somebody says something to me that is aggravating, of further inquiring, because if you ask enough questions, they'll eventually realize that the thing they said was really dumb. But I'm thinking specifically when I'm writing is how targeted I can be. So I just read this beautiful zine by Aya here, and not to call her out, but the craft move in the zine that I was fixated on is that she refused to use the word Israel, and I decided that I wanted to incorporate this into my writing, because if I continue to use this word, then I continue to legitimize this word, and I continue to give it space, and I don't want to do that in my own work. So there are certain craft decisions in terms of language that I'm trying to do that say the thing and say it clearly and create this refusal and insistence. And I think you have to really be standing in that truth, and creating a way that people can think about things that are an antithesis to the larger collective understanding of something. Sorry, Aya.
No, I've been thinking and trying to craft a way of talking about Arab and Palestinian. You know, Arab is the language, it bridges us, we're all proud of it, there's a collective culture, but each country or region is very unique. So I was thinking, what is Palestine? What is unique about Palestine that isn't true of any other Arab country, not Egypt, not Lebanon, not Syria? What is unique about it? And what I came up with is it's been for millennia, many, guardians of faith. Before Judaism, before it was where people seemed to gravitate to Jerusalem to express their faith, whatever that was. And in fiction, sometimes it's outlandish, crazy, prophets running around like the what do you call Monty Python's rendition of what that region was like. There's probably some truth there, and then other evolutions and who ruled, and nobody kicked anybody out. Nobody tried to kick anybody out. Never. Not even the Israelites. They had their little spaces, and they ruled for a couple hundred years with a little gap or something. And there were other rulers. And at some point, everybody called themselves, we're from the land of Palestine. Eventually, we're Palestinians. And it was that entire history of making room for each other's faiths. And for some reason, everybody's attracted to Jerusalem, right? And that land. And so not until recently has that been ruptured. And so I think that that's a truth that we can hold on to say this is what is unique about Palestine. Lebanon has its stories and water and, cultivation. Cultivation is a big part of Palestine too. Grafting and citrus, all oranges originate in Palestine. And so there's something unique about each, the pharaohs in Egypt, and every region has its unique face. And I think rather than just saying, well, Palestinians are not terrorists and what they're not, or they're Arab too, and just understanding that Arab also is an old language, and it was the Franco lingua for the area for a long time. I mean, understanding, and then how each region has its little antique dialect that remains from way back, prehistory stuff, in a way. And that needs to be emphasized and celebrated, and not the recent decades, the last century, let's say, should not be rewarded, because that's a failure, a huge, huge failure. It is not part of tradition. It's not even part of biblical history. So I think that's a way of I know I'm like sounding really angry, but I am, honestly. I can't help myself. But listening to Lucy calms me down.
I know I sound angry, but I am literally the calmest person. You're so calm, Doris.
Really? Yeah. I'm like, anyway, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to to say a couple things. I go back, way back, thinking in order to represent my people, to gain $1 for health care, just using that as an example, this whole self-determination. Many people don't know that our people have always been governed in this country and Canada through laws from the time the boats came. There was a law, to exterminate us. That was a law. That you can go to the archive in D.C. and you will see that. You will see, clearly how they were going to build, the boarding schools, how they were going to, to build, those structures, where they were going to get their bricks, go on, so on and so forth. That was a law. There was all this, as they call it, a way to get rid of us. If you can't kill the Indian, you're going to kill the spirit by taking away the children, which happened in my family. And so, self-determination, there's a lot that I could say just on those two words, but it does evoke a lot of pain for me, but I've gotten through all of that. I've learned to turn it around and use it against them, the colonizers. And through that, I had to learn very early on, how am I going to play this game? Because it is a game. This is a game. This is a game that we're faced off with this law and that law and this law, and when one law doesn't work or it's not effective no more for the colonizers, then a new law comes into place, and we have to scramble and figure how we have to work within that the other law, right? And as Indian people. So for me, I said, this is going to be the game that I'm going to play with to be self-determined in this land where you don't even have any money to deliver good business for your people, for better health care and mental health and so on and so forth, youth prevention services. I said my self-determination will be based on my culture. Simple. There's no law that defines what that culture is, except to deliver services by your culture that you've been carrying all these years. That we know what we have to do to fish, to hunt. We know what we have to do to maintain good health, and it's really isn't about all these laws that I knew that we were living by. I had to put those words aside. These are their words, and I had to pull out and transfer it back to my interpretation. And by doing so, it really it gave us, the strength that we needed to, deliver our services. And I'm just going to throw a couple things out. So it's using the gifts that we were given. So see my word, the gifts. That's our words are very, very, different. The gifts of all of our territories, not, the face of a land, but take it down to the gifts of the East, of the South, of the West, of the North. We all were given, gifts. All of the races were given, different, gifts, and they were handed teachings to carry forth. How we live in Africa is very different here because of the way, the terrain is very different, right? And so those, gifts and those teachings were handed down and carried us to this day from, generation, to generation, but it's the same teaching. Those teachings have not changed, and the gifts that we carry have not changed. And so the other, the guiding, the principle comes through, natural law and what that means. And out of natural law comes an understanding of the 7 grandfather, teachings. And I don't have time to go through those teachings. One is, wisdom. One is love. One is, trust. So for me, I knew that I had to, to demonstrate and put love into the work across, the board. It didn't matter if I was talking about health of the elder or a baby or a youth, but there was going to be this love, within or, woven throughout, the things that we did. My job was to teach my team, to teach, my board, and anybody who came and worked under me, they were put through some teachings because I had to teach them how they were going to function in my territory. And my territory was, Minnow-Bamatsuan. So, and it was using these powerful, gifts of knowledge that I know these things are going to carry us to this day right here, right now. If you come in my home, it's just a way we conduct ourselves. So if you get upset or you get angry or we all have challenges, we have to sit down. I know in my world, I have to sit down as an Indian, as, the elder that I am in my circle of life, and I have to behave in a certain accordance, right? And in order to help my family get through, the problems that, that we are dealing with, today. I remember one time when my granddaughter came from school, and she was called a savage by one of the students, and she was, I think, in 2nd grade. And she came in to tell me, and I was so hurt for her. I felt the pain. I felt the pain of my ancestors and what I know they went through. And it was like, here we go again, right? Here we go again. And I couldn't show that in front of, I could not show the hurt and the anger that I felt knowing some other child had hurt, my granddaughter that way, a savage. And she didn't really understand. She said, I don't think that's a good word, donokom. That's in my language. I'm a grandmother. She just knew. She said, I don't think that's a good word, though, because she knew how she felt. She felt her emotion. And I had, to listen very carefully, and I told her that I was going to speak to her parents, and that, that we'll talk about this as a family, not for her ears to hear, right? Because there are certain things our children cannot hear. We do great damage when they hear things that they're not supposed to. And you know, we're all, you know, guilty of, you know, yelling and the different things, and we get upset in our homes, and the news, and this and that. But we have to be careful around our children. We have to be careful what we say and how we speak to them. We have to try really hard. And then harder as a grandparent. I have to, you know, conduct myself a certain way. Well, when she went home, and I know where I've got to burn, you know, the anger at. I had to go outside, and I had to take, you know, my medicines, and I had to pray very hard with how I was going to go about this, because I was really angry. I was very angry, because this is my own little girl, and you don't hurt our children. You don't hurt our children with those words, the words that come from the outside. And every day there's all these words. And, you know, Doris and I, you know, we spoke about all these very harsh words, really harsh words, right? Really terrible words, and that are being said, especially around our children. And so I got on a phone, and I called, you know, her mother, and she already knew. She said, "Mom, calm down." I said, "We're going to the school first thing in the morning, and I'm going to send an email, you know, to the principal, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. Not that we're going to, you know, bombard and run into school and holler at that other child, because we're not going to teach that child anything by you know, being harsh with that child, right? So we have to do, you know, education, right? We have to do education. We have to do it in the right, you know, way. And it's hard, but we had to think it through, and we had to, you know, deliberate with ourselves as, you know, Indian people, with how we were going to do this with that school. And it's, you know, repeated ongoing education, because on, you know, on the Michigan, you know, Indian Day, which you know, the governor said now is a law. It's no longer, you know, Columbus Day. Well, how many schools are still, you know, honoring, you know, Columbus and celebrating? There are far too many in Michigan. And where my you know, grandchildren go, that's one of the schools. They're not gonna allow the indigenous, you know, the education to be in their school. They're just not gonna do it, and that's the way it is. So the way they handle it is they say, don't send your grandchildren to school on that day then. See, that those are the things. So there's a lot about these words that it's a very painful conversation for me to have. But we have to have those conversations. So I'm just giving you an example about what we have to do to have those conversations, even though they're very hard and painful at times. But so what I chose to do with those students in that classroom is to go in and to teach them about the 7 grandfather teachings. They don't know nothing of that, though. They don't know those good, wonderful, beautiful words that come out of our lodge. And sometimes we don't know what to do with very, you know, profound, you know, beautiful, you know, words. Sometimes we're at a loss, or we get bored because we're not used to that, see. For me, that's what my soul and heart, you know, desires. So every opportunity that I get to go in the lodge, or I get to go back home, and, you know, if I can fish, or I'm taken on a boat again along, you know, the river, you know, or I can go into, you know, St. Clair, you know, river, and be with my people and be with the land, it you know, nourishes me, and it feeds me, and it reinforces the language, the words of truly, you know, my people that have been time and, as I said, 10,000 years. That's what I want to go to bed with that night. That's what I want to be, you know, reminded of, not those other words. But I know about those other words. We just have to understand what to do, you know, with them. So I just wanted to give you a couple, you know, the examples of how forever in the work that I did in the past, I continue to do. It it comes from our, teachings. I believe in my heart that it's the only way to move, forward. If we're going to get there, we have a responsibility as, Indian people to help the dominant, world. We have to show them what to do here with, the conflicts that, we live with. We're now showing the dominant, world how we understand land, how we understand what to do with the water, with farming, with all kinds of things. And you're seeing a little bit of this on the news right now. For the first time in our history, it's our people that are being called to go, to the Senate, to go to the Interior, to work with those national, scientists that have all the degrees. Maybe we don't have all those, those letters behind our name. I know I don't, but I have other. I have some wisdom. I have a little wisdom. I say that I walk this earth right now. I don't have the wisdom of my ancestors, because they were tall. They were so tall with the wisdom and with the knowledge. I will never get there to be as tall as my ancestors, because I wasn't raised in this world the way they were. We were abused. And when you come from, traumatic experiences, it takes a lifetime to, to unlearn and, to relearn about yourself. You are placed on that path of healing for the rest of your life. And so I say that, I'm not ashamed to say that, and I'm not afraid, because we're here to learn. And we have to understand how, paralyzed, some of us are. And also, I think about, when I think about this war in Gaza, I think about the children and those, yet to be born, and the mothers and the grandmothers, the life, givers there, the grandfathers, and all the life that has been taken. But a baby is a baby. Doesn't matter where you come from. And all the bloodshed that's there, and the destruction of their land, and the animals and the plants and all the medicines, and just how tragic that is. I don't understand, war. I don't think I understand it. I can't wrap my hands around it, because there's a way that we can sit down as, human beings, I think, and we can, talk about the, discord of the day. In my world, at the tribal level, we sit down and we have heated, discussions sometimes, because we don't agree to agree, or we wanna, take our budget and we wanna put everything into the environment, when we know we have to put some into social, welfare systems, or into the youth, the education. So there's not enough, for everyone, but we can share. We can, we can share in that way. So I just wanted to, to share a little bit, because, the 7, grandfather, teachings, gives us a framework that, we can work by. I was at the university, I was at a university, I'm in London, Ontario, from Western University. I was asked to go there and to teach to the, diverse, group of about, 60, students, because they have, been struggling with what's going on, and there's been a lot of, problems at the university, with, the war and the students that come, from Palestine area, or, Gaza, and they're going to school there, and there's been a lot of, action out of, hate and things, that have been, their tires have been slashed, and, they've left different, remarks on the windows and doors at the university. And so they asked me if I would come and help them, and I drove there, and I listened to the students that they just all shared. I didn't really go there, with what I was going to say. I wanted to hear from them, first. And what I learned that day is they just needed somebody to hear them. That's all they needed. They needed, to vent, to cry. Some of those students had so much anger in them, at each other even. And they talked about that they had hurt each other. Some of them felt very strong that they got up and they walked over across the room and they apologized to their student, peer. And this is at the university, because they realized that they too had reacted from all of what they're hearing on the news and everything, and that they too were a victim of this war, and that they were acting out in a harmful and a negative way. So I learned that there was really nothing for me to go there and teach. I just needed to be a neutral person and hear them. They felt my compassion, and they shared that at the end. They said, thank you so much for traveling here. And this one, student came up to me. He said, I know I'm supposed to give you a gift. That's what I was told. I don't have much. But he dug in his pockets and gave me two things. He said, I have a lighter because I smoke. And I said, well, you know what to do with that right now. I just made him laugh. And he said, I know. He said, I have to quit and use. He said, you call it sema, tobacco. In our language, it's, sema. And he remembered my words when I said my prayer. He said, I'm going to learn to use that in a good way. And I told him I hope so. He said, well, here's, my lighter. I don't have that no more because I'm giving it to you. And you could tell it was really old and used. And he said, but you can use that when you have to light, your fire. I didn't tell him that we don't use a lighter, but that was okay. We do the old-fashioned way, but that wasn't what I needed to share. I accepted his gift. And then he had a little, stone. He said, I like stones and rocks, and I study them, and, they're minerals. I said, they are. And he said, this is what I have in, my pocket. He said, would you take it as a gift? I said, I will. And I told him when I go home, when we have the sacred fire, I'm going to put it there at the sacred fire. And I told him, and that will be a good thing because I'm going to always think of you. I'm never going I'm going to remember this cute little kid with, curly hair. It was kind of between, red and blondish color. But you don't, forget, profound things like that. It's just, the way it is. I'm going to carry a part of him with me, and every time I'm at that fire, I'm going to think of him. And it doesn't matter if, he forgets, that day or, what I said, that isn't even important. Because I know that there's something about him that changed that very day, that he was able, to come up and speak to me in that way. So he learned something just, that very day, because of what all the students, how they were sharing, with each other. So these are some of the examples of how I live with other people and embrace and, help them in a good way. Things have to be done in a good way, right? We start our day in a good way, and we end our day in a good way. And even though throughout the day, my life some days get very, hectic. Sometimes things don't come in a good way because there's a lot of, different, problems. But when before I go to bed at night, again, I go back to the good way. So I have to say more prayers, before I go, to sleep, because I want to sleep. I want to be able, to sleep. And I can achieve that by saying, those prayers in a good way for all those in my circle of life, and even for some of those people that have said, negative things perhaps, like when, my granddaughter came home that day, I was upset and I was very, very, angry because of how they hurt her. But I had to change that around. Because I don't want to see this child, grow up in life and carry, the ugliness that, sometimes people, behave in a very, distorted, way that's not, it isn't good for your, for your well-being.
Thank you so much for all of that, Elder Lucy. I feel like we went through a teaching ourselves right now. Thank you for those stories. It's always easier to learn, I think, from personal experience than otherwise. I hope that all of us can work in the good way and think about how we can move forward with being closer to that in our daily lives. We are 10 minutes over already, and I'm going to make an audible that we will not do open questions, but I think our panelists are here if you want to walk up to them and speak with them, and then also accept the offering from Elder Lucy of some sage tea and her kind helper. So let's give everyone a round of applause for participating today. And for yourselves for showing up. Thank you.